and I know so many. Thank you. Um, and just how important this work is, and how important what you do is. And having been a board chair with what I think was a good relationship with my superintendent, and obviously over the years, seeing when it works really well and when it doesn't work really well, we all, I think, can recognize that there are always an opportunity to improve the relationship. And so this is a real, I think this is the start of something that we're going to continue working on, because it's just, I think it can be very valuable. One of the reasons it's really important is because, well, I'm looking at a different slide. So we have the agenda. Marty, do you want to talk about the agenda?
And I just thought you were going there, but Nick, thank you for slowing down for a moment and reminding the fact that we really do appreciate and respect board members. And we kind of ran through that and had a little issues at the beginning, but the bottom line is that we generally do appreciate and respect people who are in public education. And in fact, in the article that I wrote for your Cape Journal, we said that public education's in the balance, and that the weight of its success falls largely on the relationship between the board chair and the superintendent. And it's hard. I have a wife and 3 daughters, and all of them are in education. And I'm not sure it's ever been harder to be in education, whether you're superintendent, board chair, teacher, or even a student. It's tough. So we really do genuinely appreciate and respect each person. And what we're really wanting to do today is to acknowledge that if public education is going to do well in the great state of Connecticut or the district that you represent, we believe that it's going to be at the strength of the relationship that the superintendent and the board chair are able to create together. And friends, what we're saying today is that it's not really just a concept. We know that what we're saying now is accurate, but you've got to have that solid relationship, but it's more than a concept. We want it to move through this content to be able to make sure that we can also recognize that that you're going to have to actually move towards being the cohesive team. So we're going to do our best to move from concept to literally walking this out. And here's kind of the agenda that we seek to do. One is to say, okay, what's going on in the nation? What's going to be going on? What's going on in the state of Connecticut? And then what does a superintendent need to be successful in today's landscape? And what does the board chair need? And we're going to address these 3 areas. So that is our goal. And Nick, I hope you're unmuted, because I've muted the rest of the folks. So if you want to speak, you're going to have to come off mute. So here's what we're looking at, friends. The simplicity of today is that we believe that what the superintendent needs is a confidence that the board chair can manage the board. So often we see superintendents almost being deluded to the fact that they're trying to increase the educational capabilities within their district, but they're also having to manage the board. And the superintendent should not have to manage the board. The board should be the greatest ally to the success of the superintendent. So that's what we're going to be addressing today. And then we look at it and we say, what does the board chair need so that she or he doesn't feel like they need to manage the district, or so that the superintendent can truly manage that district? And so these are those particular areas. And then, Nick, is there anything you wanted to speak to this agenda?
Just that this is really the beginning of a process. As I said earlier, we anticipate doing some additional work. In an hour, we can only cover so much. So we're kind of giving you a broader perspective, and then some takeaways. We definitely wanted to have some takeaways. But as we go forward, we anticipate further work in this area, and we're always here to help with that if need be.
Friends, I don't know that there's 2 more important questions than this. What does the superintendent need? What does the board chair need to make sure that that team is cohesive? So that's what we're aiming towards. There'll be opportunity for you to collaborate by putting some of your information in the chat. And so Ashley, the original Ashley Lupinacci, if you'll help monitor the chat when people put information in. But what we want to do now is recognize that in today's landscape, what we're seeing is a lot of complexity. Nick, would you speak to this for a moment?
Sure. Well, I know in the last 3 or 4 years, I have heard more board members say, I never thought that it was going to be like this. I've heard a lot of superintendents say, I didn't sign up to do this either. You're worried about things like masks and the whole COVID thing and vaccinations and closing schools, opening schools, remote learning when we didn't have an infrastructure for remote learning. Look how fast that hit. And now in sort of post-COVID, we still have, I think, a more empowered group of outsiders. And I'm not trying to say this is a negative, but they have various agendas. Some of them I think are very positive for public education. Some of them I think we do feel are threats. And so as a board member or a superintendent, particularly a board chair, you're weathering things you had absolutely no idea would happen in the past. Library books or curriculum materials or all kinds of things. And if you want, in fact, it's our first opportunity for you to share a little bit in the chat. If you want to type in some of the things that you're dealing with right now that you just think are really overwhelming or outside of what you think you really should be having to do, we'd love to see those.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I work with school boards across the United States, North America, and even internationally. And what's interesting is that some of these areas that Nick just spoke of are really impacting districts everywhere. So the financial uncertainties, and there's this fear of a financial cliff, just the social and political unrest that we're seeing. And most individuals I speak to, and I love to have these conversations with boards and superintendents, is we really don't know what the impact of AI is going to be, artificial intelligence, in our school systems and structures. And we really are going to need to figure that out together. But the thing that I'm seeing the most immediate, Nick, and I'm not sure how it is in Connecticut, but we're seeing a lot of areas where there's just like a move from being nonpartisan to sort of being bipartisan to just being politically charged too. So we're just seeing a lot of that with the closeness of the elections in the last, election, and then the upcoming one seems to be very charged as well.
And public education's often a center of conversation, whereas in the past, I think it was more tangential or peripheral. It was important, but now it seems to be a target. And so, especially those of you who are board chairs, you know that the spotlight's on you all the time. And if you have boards, and we see them all the time, where there are differing opinions on what is right or wrong, you've got to help get the board to find some cohesiveness or some consensus on some issues that they feel very strongly about.
Love in the chat that we're monitoring and seeing several things in terms of shortages. There's been shortages of people in education, whether it's bus drivers or teachers or substitute teachers. Is that tied to financial uncertainties? It's interesting to see those dynamics. And then, of course, we did see some of the volatility that we're seeing in board meetings. And so I think it's clear that we're going to need to come together and be more cohesive than ever to kind of figure some of these things out together. Are there insights from the chat? Friends, here's our first conceptual understanding of what we can do. So the whirlwind's going to be there. Right now, a lot of you have taken time to be able to give up to this moment to come together for the webinar. And while we're together, there's a lot of stuff going on that's urgent, that's competing for our allegiance and attention. And so the whirlwind doesn't ever stop. It's going on. But there's things that we can do. And what we can do is build these amazing teams that are able to make a difference in the middle or amidst the whirlwind. And so our concept of having a cohesive team really centers around the word of trust. We believe that the more a board can trust one another, and the way that a board and a chair and the superintendent have a high level of trust, that they're going to be able to come together and collaboratively figure out solutions that are very relevant to our communities. And so I would say conceptually that from the very beginning, if we can see that we've got to create a solid, cohesive team, and that team's going to ultimately be built on trust. There's a lot of things that create team, but ultimately everything that's going to move the right things forward for a team to be cohesive is trust. And so I'm seeing where the communities that we're serving is that there's a level of uncertainty to mistrust, maybe even distrust of a lot of institutions, and education is one of those. And so right now, we as board members have this beautiful opportunity to help increase or create trust between the educational professionals in our community. We're actually liaisons elected from the community to be able to represent the needs of our students to the professional educators so that we're creating opportunities for our students to be successful in life. That's what we're doing. That's half of our job, for sure, to be able to be a liaison from the community to the education individuals. The other half is what we're going to see is that we now, once we see that the right initiatives and processes are in place, is that we're also, as board liaisons to the community, needing to go back and share to the community why they can have confidence in the district. That's what we're really doing. And so great boards are all about creating trust. And so let's think for a moment in terms of who are we creating trust between, because there's a lot of different elements in this creating trust. So we're creating trust, as it says in the blue box, between the professional educators in our community. But that begins by creating trust between whom, right? There's several different relationships. Some of it is between the superintendent and the board chair. That's our focus today. We also need to be able to create trust between board members. A lot of board members have divergent opinions. They have different agendas, and we're going to have to come to a place where that board creates one voice that is greater than what the individual perspective is. So that's what we mean when we say trust. What I would suggest is that when you do have trust, you're opening the door to hope, and hope is the energy that causes us to move forward. But if you think of a time where there wasn't trust, there's not a lot of energy and there's not a lot of confidence that things are going to change.
So something I've been working with, and trust, again, I reiterate what Marty said about trust. I remember a board meeting many years ago where one board member was kind of the issue that we were there for. And she made the comment, I don't have to trust anybody and be a board member. And so we stopped and we talked a little bit about it. But I realized at that point that um, we can't be a functional team without it. So I started reading a bunch of books on trust, and some of them were pretty good and some of them weren't. But one of the things I came away with is what I call a trust equation, that if, and this is sort of a conditional thing, if you have a clear vision and everybody agrees to it, it isn't that 9 versions of a clear vision, it's one clear vision that everybody agrees to. If we have an action plan directly aligned to that vision and we get results, there should be trust. And when we have boards where there is a lack of that, or however dysfunction, or however you want to call it, that we go back and we have to review. Is there a clear vision? Do we maybe have to go back and start with some new goals that everybody agrees to? Does the superintendent articulate well the plan? Because they've got the plans. Are they articulating that in a way that aligns to that vision? And again, do we get reports often enough to know that the results are where we want them to be? And again, I like the slide. We'll reference it several times, I think, this morning or this afternoon. It's Marty's morning, because I think it can be very relevant. But in a way, it's creating a structure that allows for trust, which is kind of fun.
Well, kind of fun is a nice way to say it. When you're in urban planning, what you do is you build infrastructure that can be trusted to support the needs of a community, right? But it's streets, it's sewer, it's all things. When you have to create an infrastructure that's people, now it's organic, or what we call organic processes. And it's really difficult. And the fact that it's organic, then it's a trust at a whole different level than that quote unquote mechanical trust that you can do in infrastructure. So organic processes are significant to be able to move through this beautiful equation that Nick's made. But we're going to see where vision, the plans, and the results all come together through the relationships of real people. And that's what makes our job so meaningful, and yet also probably difficult at the same time. So a cohesive team, our framework is built on this concept. Again, it's an idea. It's an easy say, hard do. because a cohesive team means that we're able to get people to come together, as Nick shared, who may have various perspectives as well as passion points and agendas. And friends, just because somebody has an agenda, that's not a negative. That can be just that place of concern. And we need to hear those. We need to be aware of them. What we don't want is hidden agendas, right? We want to make sure that we understand what's important to individuals. But at the same time, to become a team, we hear what's important. We hear the passion places, the convictions, but we have to put them as if you're creating a meal. You have to put them all together, and then you look at it and you say, all right, which ones are going to be the most important? Which ones show us that there is a greater one that we haven't seen, right? And so it's a beautiful thing when we can actually create a collective voice around being connected to the needs and the concerns and the voices of our communities. So we have to remember that being cohesive is only going to be as strong as we really heard each voice, heard each person, and then created that greater mission or that greater vision that comprises each of ours. And so the more we're connected to each other, the more that we're connected to, hey, this is our passion place, our convictions, and then we connect that to the educational needs of our community, and then even being able to navigate through educational requirements from federal regulations to state requirements all the way down to district strategic plans. We have to connect all of that to be effective. And that's really what strong teams do. And when you do that, the result, as Nick was saying before, at the end of the equation was trust. And what we're saying, that trust is a confident community. We want our communities to feel great about the districts that they send their kids to. That's ultimately what we need to increase. We do that through these not only infrastructures, but friends, we do it through the relationships that we're building, right? Relationships as board members, relationships between the board chair and the superintendent, and then the relationships that the superintendent's able to create with her or his staff. So it's all about moving those relationships forward where there's trust. So to get to that confident community, what we're saying is that there's a bottom line. And the bottom line is that for many of us as board members, that we're going to have to lay aside our strong personalities. And friends, I appreciate board members so much because you have to be a type A personality almost to want to join a school board and try to make a difference in your community. It is such a big commitment. And so you need a strong drive, you need a strong personality to do that. But we can't make it about individual personalities. We have to make it about a cohesive team. And then we're going to have our agendas. And now, friends, there's so many agendas that we're hearing from outside our communities, even and all over. And for a lot of the school districts that I'm working with, there are agendas that come into a school district that aren't even people within that community that they're trying to push. So you have to really sort through the agendas and know which ones are going to have the most significant impact on your students, right? And then also we have to lay down our need to lead as individuals because we're going to lead as a team. And in that, we're really building that's when we build credibility. And when I say credibility for the board, I want us to, just be reminded of the fact that you as a board member are representative of your district. We're not, the board's not seen like, sometimes you say, well, that board is a great board, but it's not a good district. You never hear that. If you have a great board, it's because you have a great district. Or you'll say, well, the district's great, but the board's not. No, we see the district and the board synonymously. We see them from the community perspective as a team. And so we really want to make sure that we understand that and that we are a credible team. Nick, I love this slide.
So here's Caruso throwing the little levity into it. You see these on social media all the time, these memes, how society sees me, parents, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been trying to work on one for school boards. And in fact, if any of you have ideas, ncaruso@cabe.org, feel free to send them along. But for example, how I see me, I have already found the picture of Mel Gibson in the movie The Patriot, where he's charging across the field with the American flag. Um, how society sees me, I've got a picture from the original Frankenstein movie with the community members with the torches and the pitchforks. Um, and my parents probably similar to the one that's here. Actually, my dad would call every Friday. Did you see the Bloomfield Journal this week? I can't imagine what they've said about you. Well, maybe that's the Joan of Arc at the getting burned at the stake. But the idea is, though, that we don't really know what perceptions are, and perceptions change. And in the past, it's all been anecdotal. And the reason I sort of led up to this is because as we were talking, Marty shared with some really interesting data about perceptions. And our next slide is going to be him starting to walk through some of that, but it doesn't have to be anecdotal and it doesn't have to be perception. There's some real hard data about some of this stuff. So Marty, I'd love for you to share that because I think it's fascinating.
As an urban planner, I really enjoy working for Franklin Covey because we are, of course, a data-based research organization. And friends, for those of you who may not have heard of Franklin Covey, we're the folks that did 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, The Speed of Trust, 40X, Trust and Inspiration. And so we've been in leadership for a long time, 30 plus years, and we've had some significant impact. We're one of the leaders on the planet in terms of the amount of Fortune 100, 500 companies that we work with, United States military, government agency, nonprofits, and education. So the beauty of it is our footprint is all over, which helps us to acquire data that gives us an opportunity to be a leader in change management, human behavior, and leadership development. And so one of the things that we do when we go into an organization, whether it's, again, nonprofit, education, or corporation, we do a test that is more specific, and it's moving towards understanding the levels of trust and credibility with individuals who are a part of a team. So just think of a board for a moment where you have 5, 7, 9, maybe even 11 members. And then you also have the superintendent, part of that team, even though they're a non-voting member, they're still part of that team. So just think of your own team for a moment. And then in your team, if you were to assess yourself, forget everybody else, just assessing yourself, how would you do it? Well, we would say you'd want to be able to look at the results that you're able to bring. And then your capabilities, just the skill sets that you have that you bring to that team. Your intent in terms of what is your commitment to the team, and then the integrity is, do you actually do what you say you're going to do? How well do you show up and move forward? And when we ask people to take this test, this is 56,782 data points on it, so that's a lot, friends. And when you take it, this is the average across all the venues, and it's very similar. So most of the people say that as far as me getting the results I'm supposed to get, they're at 84. And then, Nick, would you just remind me, in Connecticut, is that a B or a C? What would that be if you did grades?
I think 84 is still a B.
All right. Capabilities, do you really have what you need? Do you bring value to the team? Now you're in the C level, you're at 78%. Your intent, well, this is where we say, you know what? I'm really doing my best. I'm working my hardest. I'm really doing everything that I know how to do with the right reasons. We're getting higher than my integrity. Do I really follow through and do what I say? Yes, I'm at an A in that area. So that's how we view ourselves. This is the interesting point. When you now go and you say to the rest of the team, well, you also evaluate your team members. This is where it moves to. And in our state, friends, if you're not hitting at least 60 in every district, that's not a passing grade. And so that's why we put it in red here. So other people do not view us as being able to bring the results that we said we would. And this is fascinating. And what I do sometimes with this, Nick, is I look at it and I say, okay, if this is how the team, my own team, is viewing me, then what is the disconnect? What can I do, right? Then the next level of questions that we need to give ourselves are, what would happen if the community took the school board and the superintendent and also did the same credibility test? How would we come out, right?
Well, in
So
a
I
way,
thought,
Marty, they kind of do when they have elections, but by then it's often too late.
that's all you're making. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because you can either laugh or cry, right? I agree. And at that point, their perspective of us is having a huge impact on what we're able to do for student success. So I'm just curious in the chat, why do you believe there's this disconnect on how other people view us and how we view ourselves? Place that in the chat, would you? There's been great insights in the chat. Why the disconnect? We view ourselves as BA people. Other people are looking at us going, no, not really. Why is that? Yeah, misinformation, respect's lacking, political agendas, absolutely. Self-reflection, it's so hard to have self-reflections in public meetings, isn't it?
Well, Marty, in that case, there's one value to being in Connecticut because you can do a board self-evaluation in executive session. So for those of you who want to do that, and if you'd like help, let us know. We can do that, by the way, just as an aside.
And Nick, that I think it's significant because if we can see self-evaluations and self-assessments as learning opportunities through a growth mindset versus punitive, now when those elections come up and stuff, we're bringing the right kind of changes necessary. Friends, I hope you're reading the chat. Your insights are spot on. A lot of us, we really don't understand our roles. I love that. I've seen that several times in it. And so we think we're doing great because we're carrying our agenda, and yet we're supposed to be collaborative, right? And so if we don't understand how it really works, we can be inadvertently undermining the team instead of strengthening it.
Oh, and I just throw out for those of you who want to have some time and look through some of these comments later because they are really good. Where the little three dots are in the chat, you'll see if you click on that, you can save the chat and then it'll save it as a text file that you can read later at your leisure. So interesting little thing I had not realized for a long time in Zoom meetings. You can save the chat and have it later.
Thank you, Nick. And also just a good reminder that we're going to be sending out the power deck to each person as well afterwards. And we'll make sure that you have an opportunity to go through the material. What we're saying is one of the main reasons that people on our own teams don't see us the same way that we see ourselves and our abilities because we're not truly connected with them. We're not connected around the same vision. We don't understand our part. And so I say it this way in terms of a board, we've got to know who we are as a board. We've got to know where we're going as a board. We've got to know what we're doing. And friends, if there's in any walk of life, we don't know who we are, where we're going, and what we're doing, it's hard for other people to correctly evaluate us. It's hard for us to evaluate and assess our own, capabilities, right? And so those things really have to be the anchor point of what a board is. Who are we? Where are we going? And what are we doing? And so for us to come to that place, we're going to have to come together as a board and literally create a team, this cohesive team. That's where the credibility will come from because that's where the clarity will come from. We can all get literally on the same page, right? And so this is what I've learned as a team member. How can I increase my credibility in the atmosphere of being on a board? And I would suggest to you, this doesn't sound exciting. It doesn't sound like, new. It's just hard. The only way to really increase our credibility as a team is to be teachable and correctable. No, we don't get to speak the loudest. We don't get to speak the longest. We get to listen the hardest, right? We get to see areas where we can change and bring value. But when we're teachable and correctable as a board, it's going to have an amazing impact on the relationship between the board chair and also the superintendent and the district. It's going to be modeled all the way down to the classroom. That's our goal. And so when we look at it, friends, we're saying that there's two main things that we've talked about conceptually in terms of we want to make sure that we are a cohesive team. We're going to have to be collaborative problem solvers coming together with respect and valuing each other and just learning how it works. We're learning together, right? In that, for that to happen, there's two great questions that we've got to focus on. What's the role of the board chair and what's the role of the superintendent in creating these teams? And that's the rest of our opportunity to be together today is we're going to be looking at that. And we're going to be looking at it through these four lenses. So great boards are going to have to get four things right as a team. So this is believing that you can come together as a team, that you would be cohesive, but you would come together because of these four things, that you want to do these four things right, that you want to do them well. And number one, as we saw it in the chat, is that there's got to be a high level of clarity around the board roles and the superintendent roles. So it's as simple as who's going to manage the board and who's going to manage the district. And in that, are there standard operating procedures? Are there norms? Are there bylaws that are actually abided by so that everybody knows whose lane is what, so that the most important things get done? That's number one. Number two is that you've got to have a shared vision around student success. And this is where we ask board members to lay down their personal agendas to pick up a greater agenda. It's where we hear each person's concern, but we're actually building structures and allocating resources and developing policies for every, not just each. So we'll see more about that, but it's all about a shared vision around student success. And then number three, as Nick alluded to this earlier, you got to have an accountability plan aligned to what's the most important thing, your initiatives and evaluations that move the right things forward. And then number four, if you can do 1, 2, and 3, friends, then what we say is that now you're really ready to engage the community. But if we try engaging the community without being clear of our own roles and responsibilities, if we don't have a shared vision, if we can't say this is who we are, where we're going, what we're doing, if we don't have an accountability plan that's transparent and helping the community see the progress that we're making, then when we go to engage the community, oftentimes it's damage control, or we're just going to them because we need something from them. We need to pass a bond or a levy or something like that, or even our budgets. So we want community engagement aligned to developing further community partnerships and leadership development. This is what we're learning. When you get these four things right as a cohesive teams, you will make a difference right in the middle of the whirlpool.
So to dovetail on that only slightly, I mentioned before the interesting thing, or what interested me so much about working with Marty and Ashley was the concepts are universal. Franklin Covey, clarity, shared vision, et cetera. The National School Boards Association developed the 4 pillars of school board leadership, 20 something years ago. And it's the same thing: clear vision, structure, accountability, community engagement. Don't have to elaborate on them that much, other than organizations that deal with leadership have the same recurring themes. They call them different things. But again, here's NSBA. If you go to the next one, the Lighthouse work, some of you are familiar. I know a couple of you have gone through Lighthouse training, and a couple of you want to go through it. And we're still waiting for that state grant so we can do it. But in the Lighthouse research, they had 5, but setting clear expectations, the vision, hold the system accountable. Word accountable is very important in all of these. Create conditions so the work can succeed. Do we have a structure that supports our vision? Creating public will. Every one of these talks about the need for the community to be involved and supportive. And that means, and that's you. You are the public in public schools. You are the communicators. Not that your superintendent isn't critical as a communicator also. And the one thing Lighthouse also added was learning as a board team. I mean, it's very important that you learn. I know in the chat, several people said the same thing, that a lot of us people just don't know their roles. Well, that is often the case, especially right, after the election. And remember, there are opportunities for board development this fall and this winter for your boards to help you with that. But the idea that boards that learn together as a team also, there's a connection between that. Lighthouse is research based, and so their research showed that boards that work together to move forward are more effective, or the student achievement is enhanced by that.
I love these five, from your lighthouse. And my favorite one, I have to admit, is the create the public will to succeed, because right now that's so relevant. In the public right now, we're just often divided and we're at different places. And we're at the highest level of mistrust towards public education that we've been in the 18 plus years that I've been working with education. And so if there was ever a need to create a will that says, wait a minute, we believe in public education and this is what we can do, that time is now. And I also love learning as a board team. For me, the reason I stayed on the board all those years is because we were a team. I mean, we were learning together. We were teachable and correctable. And when we had meetings, I left being a sharper individual because of the fact that I spent time with the superintendent, their staff, and our board team. And that's what makes it really work. But thank you for your lighthouse work. Now I feel like we are at the meat of the moment. We have 17, 18 minutes left. So we have 9 minutes for each one of these concepts. And this is where it gets good, friends. So thank you for being with us. Not that it hasn't been good so far, but anyway, I just want to make sure we ask this question. What does the superintendent need? Now we say that, what do they need? Remember, it's what does the superintendent need so that he or she doesn't feel like they need to manage the board. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that I work with school boards, again, across the country, internationally, and certainly in many different venues, from many school districts of only 700 students to school districts with 135,000, top largest 20 in the United States. And I see the same thing, that superintendents, while their background is really professional educators with amazing expertise in being able to do something very hard, and we're going to look at that in a moment, that's a difficult assignment, to know how to navigate through federal regulations, state regulations, create strategic educational plans that are going to enable us to get past even the last few years of the global pandemic, which has made it very difficult on students, and not to mention anybody in education like teaching. So it's really hard, right? That expertise is very much needed. What I am concerned about is that a lot of the superintendents who have all that are also trying to manage the board. And because the boards are not that cohesive team, they feel it necessary to be able to solidify that relationship. And so I just want to give you some data now, because Nick, I appreciate the fact that you like the research-based and data as well. But when I first got on the board, the average tenure of a superintendent, and of course, it was 18 years ago, was 5.5 years, almost 6 years. When I got off the board almost 2 years ago, it was 3 years, the average tenure of a superintendent. We've just looked at it recently, and if you look at it right now, the average tenure of a superintendent is 2 years and about 8 months. So not even 3 years, right? So that's not a healthy trend. And so what we do know in change management, friends, is that for there to be systemic change in an organization, it takes 3 years before change actually becomes systemic or sustainable. And so we can show you in the data that when a new individual comes as a CEO or superintendent, whatever, to an organization, the first year is really about just understanding the landscape of that organization. And sometimes, people call it the honeymoon period or grace period, but you're just coming in, you're getting to know folks, and you're getting to know what's going on, because you need to have an idea of where it could go. So you're kind of just getting the landscape. Year two is when you actually build your team to be able to move the organization from one level to a new level, a higher level. And so it takes bringing the right team to be able to have that happen. So year two, oftentimes you'll see some changes in leadership. And then year three is when that systemic change actually starts taking place, because people go like this: oh my goodness, we really are going to have to do this. It's being embedded in the system. It's also becoming a part of our culture. So it takes 3 years to create change. So I'm so much aware of that, that I know that one of the things that we're going to have to do is help superintendents to be able to feel like they're going to be able to stay there long enough to create the change that they believe is important. So this is very significant conversation that we're having right now, because we want the superintendent to be able to have confidence that he or she is not going to have to try to navigate a dysfunctional board, or a board that's sideways, or a board that has too many good ideas to implement, right? So that's what we're talking about here. So number one, it's going to come down to the superintendent's going to need to know that they're going to have both a personal and a professional relationship with the board chair. That relationship's solid, that they can be transparent, that they're going to be respected, as we saw in earlier chats, that there's going to be that give and the take, a seeking to understand and to be understood, but you can really have trust in that individual. And if the superintendent doesn't trust the board chair, or the board chair doesn't trust the superintendent, the ability to have confidence in the way that the board chair is going to manage the board is just not going to be that trustworthy. And so that's what we meant when we talked about the cohesive team. If you have that confidence there between these two, you're moving towards a cohesive team. Any insights in the chats do you want to put on the number one, just that solid relationship between the board chair and the superintendent? And I didn't know if you were aware, friends, of the tenure, but it's very accurate, and it's trending down, which should cause us to be concerned. In the first box there, the cohesive team, think about what happens when a superintendent stays 3+ years. The impact it has on the community. The community actually believes that superintendent's there, that they care, right? That they're going to stay. It's amazing when a superintendent feels that security, that they don't have to look over their shoulder and wonder, right? Number two is that you've got to have a consistent practices of board bylaws that actually support the superintendent's leadership. I guarantee what a superintendent needs is a board. It doesn't always have to be unanimous votes. That's not it, because there can be great disagreements, there can be great dissension, but there's going to have to be one voice leadership that Nick alluded to earlier. If I am a leader of an organization and I don't have clarity of where I'm supposed to be going, my management skills are not going to be employed correctly. And so the best thing that a superintendent can be given is consistency, which is really the board practicing bylaws that make sure that they're in the right lane, that they can be counted on, that there's not surprises at board meetings, that there's not hidden agendas, but that there's clarity of who you are and where you're going.
Yeah, Marty, even though I'm concerned about our time, I did want to throw out that there are times when I hear from superintendents, and some boards have that one board member who is always challenging, the one negative vote, perhaps. Several of you, you know who I'm talking about, whatever your board is. But what I hear from the superintendents with some of them is, at least I know where they're coming from. I don't have surprises, so I can work with that. So even when it's somebody that is pushing back or disagreeing, they're consistent, and it's something from their core. It's not just willy-nilly, or today I feel like I'm against it. They're consistent, and there's a pattern, and you can work with that. So again, those bylaws become important for that process.
Especially if the superintendent doesn't have to say, would you please enforce these bylaws, to the board chair, right? When the board chair is using them in our meetings, in fact, proactively at the end of our meetings. Nick, you had shared that you've been in a board training where they actually created talking points and bullets after passing key action items.
Yeah, a very simple thing. When a board passes something, and not maybe the minutes, but on anything substantive, before they move on to the next order of business, the chair says, "What's our talking point going to be on this, or what are our talking points going to be?" And typically, they're prepared ahead of time, but can be modified if the motions change. But it might be, we our research showed that a math program, or that there was a deficiency in a particular math skill. So our curriculum team went out, researched curriculum, came up with a program that will help alleviate that deficiency. We've implemented this. This is how we're going to know within the next year or two whether we've been successful. And that's narrowed down to 3 little bullet points. And then anyone in the community who says, "Why did you do that?" There's a consistent messaging going back. And that simple little question has so much power.
Does. And then the board can even say, and oh, by the way, community, this is what you can do to help make this successful. That's when we're really cooking. And that's called a shared vision. And you have to have that shared vision between the board chair and the board. You have to have that shared vision between the superintendent and the board and the district. And then ultimately you will have it through the board and the community. But if you don't have it through these elements, and we think the community is going to be in alignment, probably not. So that's what a superintendent needs, is the clarity, a shared vision, and everybody getting on that same page. So imagine having 9 bosses versus 1 boss. And that's really ultimately what we're looking at. And then if the boss sees themselves as being punitive or trying to get their way versus setting up the superintendent for success and being supportive of their leadership, then you've really got problems. So here's what we're saying in the chat. I would be interested if you would put in your ideas in terms of board chair rotation and just the modeling of collaborative problem solving in your board meetings. Is your board chair able to say to the superintendent, we're going to be problem solvers? Or, are we looking at moving our agendas forward? So those are the things that we want to be aware of. If you get it right, friends, we're just going to send you this slide. Then what happens in alignment with what Nick was saying is that we're able to show our community that we've heard their concerns and we've created goals around them as a district to move the most important outcomes forward. And then we're able to look at their concerns and their voice in a transparent way that shows them the progress that we're making. This is what we ultimately want to make sure we give to our community. But again, it's because we've gotten the first 3 things right. But we'll send the slide out to you just in making sure that we create time to talk about this, which is what does the board chair need from the superintendent? And so I would suggest to you that as a board chair, and I was board chair for almost 8 years while I was on the board, is that I had a high level of confidence that the superintendent in our district literally felt connected to the community, to the staff, and they were there for the long haul. They weren't there trying to jump from one position to the next. They weren't looking for another opportunity. They were there to make a difference. And that's very significant. The educational expertise and sustainability was also important. I needed to know that the superintendent could do this very complicated task of hearing from each need, right? So here's what a board is doing. A board is hearing from each board member who is representing the community and ultimately representing students who don't even get to vote, right? So we're representing them to the superintendent and the professional educators. We hear each person's concerns, we hear each person's insights, but ultimately we have to build a structure for every student, not just each. And so going from each to every is very difficult. And so that requires that a superintendent is able to do that hard work. And the board chair needs to be able to say, not only do they understand each one of these needs, but they can build structures that are going to be able to prioritize the right ones. And that's number 3, which is just aligning board initiatives to district goals. So here's what it looks like. It looks like the superintendent is going to be connected to the community, and they're able to say with a level of credibility that I'm here for this community. And thank you, superintendents. We got several superintendents on the call today. It's so hard to do your job. We're so appreciative, and we literally want to keep you for as long as possible. We want you to make that difference. and be able to utilize the skills that you have. We thank you for your educational expertise because student success depends on it. And so we're here to help you and as a board to do our part to build organic processes and a team around you so that you can build that same systemic and organic processes in our school district. And then we've got to be able to have clear goals. And friends, again, if we're going to increase the confidence of the community, we need to be able to say, here's the one or two most important, relevant initiatives this community needs. Our superintendent has been addressing these through these plans, and we're confident that they're going to work. And we need your help. We need you to come alongside and be a part of the solution as well. That's what we really believe board chairs need from their superintendents.
So Marty, every time you use the word credibility, it reminded me of an article which I've posted in the chat. You can download it, I believe, from there. I hope it works. About credibility of leadership. It's an article about how you become credible, and it isn't by talking about it; it's by doing it. Living the work you're doing, and you might find that helpful.
Very good. And friends, in the chat, speaking of the chat, Nick, thank you. Because we can utilize it and we'll send it out. But what makes a superintendent want to stay for at least 3 years? That's a good thought that we should have. And go ahead, we've got a few minutes left because we're now at the end of our slides. But put in what you believe. And superintendents, if you're courageous enough, what would make it to where you wanted to stay for at least 3 years? And my guess is that we look at the chat. We're going to see that superintendents really do want to make a difference. They want their skill sets to actually impact students. It's the same reason my wife and 3 daughters are teachers, is because they love to see students set up for success in life. That's what we do. Free to put some of your superintendent, I'm going to stay for at least 3-year comments in the chat, friends. So we just need to close with this thought, Nick, is how well does your board understand the line between vision, direction, and management? This is where it all comes together on those roles. And as vision is what we as a board, along with the superintendent team, come together to be able to understand what our students need to be successful in life right now. That's the vision that we have. So we call them vision statements and mission statements. So those are good to work on. But direction is if we're going to have that outcome, if we're going to have those successful students, what are some of the most important initiatives that we need to do right now? And this is really the board work. Now, who manages the plan and moves it forward? That's really the superintendent's work. And so that's really where we want to make sure that we have the clarity. I know that when we are in, is it Newport in December? We're going to be drilling these down because each one of these areas that we've talked about in terms of those 4 areas for successful boards is really a full day concept of being able to work that out to where we literally come out with some tools at the end of the process. And so for us to hit these areas today in terms of what board chairs need and superintendents need, we've done it in an hour. But I know at that conference, we're going to have some takeaways to where we can drill down to here's some specific things that you can do to make sure that the board and board chair and the superintendent relationship is strong and cohesive. Nick, do you have any further comments? I'm just acknowledging here that what we're saying is we want to make sure we understand who we are, what we're going, what we're doing. We'll send these slides out, and then the significance of moving from each to every. We've already talked about that. I've gotten ahead a little bit to make sure we got this in. But any other closing comments that you might have?
I just wish we had a lot more time because we really just scratched the surface. And we're looking forward to December in Rocky Hill at the Sheraton, I believe it is. And we hope you'll be there. In fact, we encourage you to come as chair and superintendent team, and we'll try to give you some work to do that day to give you something to do. But thank you. I wish we had more time, as I say, because we could spend a day on this easily. There's a lot to talk about. If there's anything we can do to support you, there'll be elections in November. Some of you may remain chair. There may be new chairs. please encourage them to reach out, and I encourage you to reach out if you need anything from us. We're here to support you.